Hi, this is a quick supplement on attribute gauge R&R. And attribute gauge R&R is simply another way of running a gauge R&R study if you're doing some measurement system analysis and you're doing it on something like a categorization. So, for example, if you had people like, for example, if you had nurses who needed to categorize a particular diagnosis, or if you had, or ailment, if you had people in the call center who needed to categorize reasons why people called, if you had people who were doing a voice of customer survey and you needed them to categorize, what type of response did this customer make, and wanted everybody to be in agreement, you'd have a situation with an attribute gauge R&R. Now, these sorts of things can come in very, very handy as mentioned before, or mentioned in the regular gauge R&R or measurement systems. After you've run a project and you want to systematically install some essentially checks to see that the auditor and the data collection folks who are doing this on an ongoing basis are doing it in a structured way and in a way that's going to yield good data. That can often be very important for auditing teams or for QA and so forth. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly. The good, the bad, and the ugly of attribute gauge R&R. The good news is it's usually pretty simple. You need a few standard parts or standard calls or standard responses from customers or whatever. You need a few appraisers or a few operators who are actually going to be collecting the data, and you need a lot of trials. That's the that's the downside, is that you need a lot of trials. Another upside is that it's actually pretty easy to do the gauge R&R, but it often doesn't tell you anything other than, boy, you need to really redo your operational definitions on what you mean by the word other or what you mean by the word technical, and so forth. Anyway, it can be illuminating with respect to that. So let's just go to it. After we finish this, you are certainly going to be able to perform a gauge R&R in Minitab. We're going to use Minitab to do this. You can see, though, that just tallying up things, after we do the analysis in Minitab, you can see that just tallying up things would give you a pretty good idea. Okay. Here's one of the places where you can do it, but as mentioned, you could also do it in the control plan part of things. You could put gauge R&R into your control plan. All right, again, we need multiple parts and multiple operators of appraisers. And again, the setup is the difficult thing. Just like in gauge R&R for the continuous case, the operators need to be blind to the part that they're assessing. If they know, for example, especially if you're doing repeats. So if I'm going to give somebody the same phone call and I want them to categorize it, I've got to probably separate it by a certain amount of time so they don't recognize the same thing, or I have to make one that's just about like that. Or I could simply ignore the repeats thing and just look for differences between operators. And that is usually helpful in and of itself. We're going to cover an example of that. Another thing is that usually we'll want to have some sort of expert opinion as to how exactly should this be categorized. Okay? All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the file MSA calls, and we're going to think of a company. It's a call center. Think of Microsoft maybe, and you call up Microsoft, and they're going to, or maybe your bank. But let's stay with Microsoft. You call up Microsoft, and they're going to categorize their calls as maybe billing or technical or whatever. And so in this file, what we have is we have a number of different sample calls, and we have the appraiser, and we're going to give those samples to the appraiser, and to multiple appraisers, and we're going to see what they appraised it and what the correct one was. Okay, so let's take a quick look at that file, which I've got open right here, MSA calls. Here it is right here. Boy, it's a big one. As such, I'm still going to blow it up a little bit there. So there's our appraiser Joe, categorization, and there's the attribute. Okay, so I want you to notice a couple of different things. One is he's missing a few of these. So there he said billing, and it was actually options. There he said options, and it was actually billing. Gets a lot of the prepays right. He said billing, and it was other. He said enrollment, and it was other. He said other, and it was other, etc. And then here's Bob. And Bob had a bunch of things that he looked at. It looks like they looked at 90 different samples. And here's Mary. Did the same thing. So obviously the goal here is to get people to be categorizing things exactly as they should. And we could easily do a match on this if we wanted to do a picture. And this is detailed in the book. We could do this. We could form if we wanted to do it ourselves, we could form a correct column. I'll just put, is it correct? And then make this an if-then statement. If this is equal to this, if column C is equal to column D, then 1, otherwise a 0. And we could essentially count the 1s and the 0s. And that would give us an interesting way of looking at it. Like if we wanted to do this in Excel stats, we can look at, say, to cat. We can look at this by this, and we can look at the sum of the scores. Okay, so that would be maybe something that we could do. All right, but I'm going to go ahead and do this in Minitab because Minitab has some canned analysis. So let's just copy this and put it into Minitab. I've already done it, but I'm going to do it again. There we are, because otherwise you may not believe me. And let's do it in Minitab. Now Minitab has it in a funny place. It's Stat, Quality Tools, Attribute Agreement Analysis. So that's what we're going to be doing. And I'll do the whole thing. So here they say we want the attribute column. Well, the attribute column is actually the score that that person gave that particular sample. So in this case, it's their categorization. The samples are in, of course, the sample column. These are the 90 taped calls that we would give somebody. The appraisers are in the appraiser, and that's one of the reasons why I called it that. And if you have it, you put in the known standard. If you don't have it, you don't have to put it in, but then it can only tell whether they agreed with each other. It can't tell whether they agreed with themselves. We'll note one more thing, that there have been no repeats in this case. So we didn't give the same phone call multiple times to the same person. So Minitab knows this, and it will not do those analyses. So we're going to put in the correct value there, hit OK. And there you have it. Let's take a look at this. This is sort of the overall, and it shows you how often each one of these appraisers was, quote, getting it right by the standard. So it looks like overall they are getting the correct answer roughly 80% of the time. I guess Bob is at a little bit lower. But there's the confidence interval that is around it. So you really can't say, well, Bob needs more training than Joe, needs more training than Mary, because they all kind of overlap. And that's just due to the fact that, boy, you need a lot of samples when you have attributes. We did 90 each. So, what can it tell us? Let's just take a quick look at that. And to do that, we go to the session window. An interesting thing is, I think, is you want to start at the bottom of this one. It's unfortunate that they put it this way, but the bottom one kind of gives you the summary. So this is all the appraisers versus a standard. And this says how many they inspected, how many times they matched the correct answer, all of them, and what percentage that is. That's what we really want. How many times would, if we gave it to anybody, would we get a match? And here it says that not very good, 47%. So this is a measurement system that's basically giving about 50% of the time you're going to get something that's right. That's pretty awful. And it would be the same if you gave it to anybody. So, so that's that. And they have these Fleiss's kappa statistics, and I'll tell you what those are. Basically, you look at this, and a high kappa goes from 0 to 1. A high kappa means you're really good at categorizing. A low kappa means you're not good. So here you can tell at a glance, for example, that other is a problem area for people. Also, billing, problem area. Okay? Rule of thumb is around 70% or higher you want. I actually like to have higher, but if you look on Minitab, Minitab will say 70%. I like to have higher than that, higher agreement. The higher the agreement, the more that this is that everybody's going to agree that the categorization is right. And in a practical sense, the data are much more trusted in a case like that. Okay, scrolling on up. That's the same thing. That's the between appraisers. So this tells you like how many times they matched themselves, and it turns out that that's the same as how many times they matched the standard. So the good news is every time at least somebody got it right. And now here it is, their individuals breakdown, and you can see essentially that, for example, Joe was really good at doing prepay and technical. Overall, he is pretty good. I mean, sorry, that was Bob. Joe is having problems with other, and Mary is also having problems with other. So all roads are pointing to Rome here. Start to do other, and then the next thing would be billing. So make sure that everybody understands what are the things that are agreed with billing, and then go on to, other, and then go on to billing. That makes some sense. Okay, I just wanted to finish this up by showing you a simple way to maybe do this in Excel and kind of analyze it and get an idea of how likely things are to be, or to how to analyze this data. So essentially what we've got is we've got 90 samples, and what we want to do is we want to look at Joe, and we want to look at two things. One is, what are people getting more correct, technical, enrollment, options, or billing? We can look at that as an overall. We can also look at Joe and how many he's getting correct, and so forth. So let's go ahead and do that. Two of these are going to be done in 2CAT, and then we'll look at all three of them together. How often Joe is getting technical correct versus Mary is getting technical correct, and so forth. And we'll see what we can say about all those three things. So first of all, let's go to 2CAT, and let's take a look at appraiser by not their categorization, but how often they got something correct. If we come over to summaries, you can see I've got row-wise proportions in here, and I could put that as percentages if we want. You'll recognize as the Minitab output, although Excel Stats is giving you both correct and incorrect. And now I've got a 90% confidence interval on this, and you can see actually pretty clearly from here that, yeah, Joe and Mary are doing a little bit better than Bob, but there's not really enough data to really tell a significant difference between them. But this tells you basically that everybody is getting around between, say, 70 and 80% correct. All right, when you give it to them, they're getting about 70 and 80% correct. So that's kind of the standard that's out there. If you want to do better, you'd want to give this particular test multiple times and see them getting better over time. So that could be one thing that's there. Now, suppose we wanted to, instead of looking at Joe, Bob, and Mary, let's look at, see, how often are people getting the correct attribute, or the attribute correct. And so that's what we'll take a look at here. And you can see that, for example, technical, they're getting correct almost all the time. Here's enrollment, not too terrible. Prepay is also good. But other, not so good, and billing, not so good. Enrollment and options are sort of middling. So to me, this tells me a lot in terms of the analysis that I could do And it's nice that it gives me a nice picture. I can see pretty instantly, hey, if we want to improve, we're going to have to improve on the areas of categorizing other and categorizing billing. We have to get better at those different things. And this is just the simple two-cat analysis, very straightforward. I can look at how people do by looking at appraiser versus the number that were correct on the Summaries tab. And I can do the same thing with the correct attribute in this case, and looking to see whether each person got it correct by looking at this. And that tells me a lot in either case. Okay, finally, I'm just going to, with some trepidation, I'm going to show you the how do you do all three at once. And to do that, the easiest, we're going to use Excel Statistics NCAT, which we haven't used before. It's just essentially create some pivot tables, which we could do by hand doing pivot table, but I just want to show you what's there. So to make it easy, I'm going to cut this and move it over here. Remember, these are the three things that we care about. The appraiser, what the correct one was, and whether they got it correct. Okay, so we can actually go to Excel Statistics, do NCAT for 3 of them. Click OK, and basically Excel Statistics creates these pivot tables for us. Now they're not necessarily in a helpful place here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move these by clicking and dragging. You can do that. So now I've got sorry about that. Now I've got the appraiser. Let me try that again. I wanted to have it in the other direction. Okay. There we go. There we go. Okay, so I've got Bob and his billing, and Joe and his billing, enrollment options, and technical, and all that. And now I just want to add this over here, and now I can tell basically all three at once. I can see, for example, in billing, Bob got 6 out of the 15 correct, and there's his technical, he got 14 out of 15, and here's his other, he got 6 out of 15, and so forth. He got 6 out of 15 wrong. And we can look down here and see how many, what were the problem areas. So this is kind of looking at them in all at once, Joe, Bob, and Mary, and so forth. But I really like those other pictures in Excel Stats with the 2-cat of this one and then the other one of Joe, Bob, and Mary, where you can actually look and see if any appraisers are having trouble, any specific appraisers are having trouble, and this is any specific area is having trouble. All right. So basically, that's it. We walked through each of the different things. In Minitab, if you want to redo it, it's all right here, and you can find it, even including the FLICES statistics if you want. Okay, there is one example of attribute MSA that's given in the back, and I think you'll have enough to work through it. So good luck. And hopefully you can use Gauge R&R, this attribute Gauge R&R. You'll find it to be a simple tool, very, very helpful at illuminating where people have a problem measuring or categorizing things. Okay, take care, and we'll see you down the road.